in height, rushing up heavenwards with a frightful roar. Roger Danzy.
What Danzy was witnessing was the cataclysmic eruption of Mt Tarawera. The world would later learn that about 120 people died that terrible night, and the eighth wonder of the world, the Pink and White Terraces, had vanished. This is the story of that eruption. It is the story of New Zealand's most devastating volcanic eruption in human times, and the destruction of one of nature's most beautiful creations, the Pink and White Terraces. It is also the story of the fateful events that led to the eruption and the mystery that has surrounded them ever since.
Te atua, mana whitia mātau I te nepo. I ale mai te rongwai, ma mahi a rātau, o mene atu ki te pō. Te rātau o mene atu, mui mai I ro te ringa a te mau hoki o te rungurawa. A kia tātou te hungaura, ai te nā tātou. E ko koi hoki te atua e ora nei e mana nei, ngata umutu ka kore. The
Tarawera eruption happened in 1886. Today, more than 100 years on, the fate of the Pink and White Terraces is still debated. There persists a myth that beneath the volcanic rubble the terraces have somehow survived. For the young New Zealand colony, the terraces were an enormous drawcard that brought thousands of tourists from all over the world.
Our first visitors arrived that you could call tourists in 1838-39. And the one thing those people all wanted to see from that visit and on was the Pink and White Terraces. They were the attraction. Nothing else seems to have been of great consequence to people. And they were prepared to walk or to ride horses or to do whatever was necessary to view those Pink and White Terraces.
Getting to the terraces was an arduous journey. 24 kilometres from Rotorua in the central North Island, they lay along New Zealand's volcanic line of fire. The place from which most tourists visited the terraces was the small village on the shore of Lake Tarawera, Tarawera. Today, all that is left is the buried village, a small Antipodean echo of Pompeii. The trip was a 9-hour day, beginning with a 2-hour row across the lake, then a 1-hour stroll overland to the White Terrace situated on Lake Rotomahana. A typical party consisted of 8 tourists, 8 boatmen and a guide.
Ladies all dressed in their silks and beautiful clothes, and the gentlemen with their bell toppers and canes, and travelling to see the sights. It was a wonderful place to go. I believe the charge for going over the terraces for the day was £10. That's what the Maoris charged, £10. And no one was allowed to go on the terraces without a guide.
At the first step we came to, we were petrified with delight for a moment. Set in a basin of pure white silica, delicately carved and fretted, lay a pool of pale blue water, so pure in colour, so opaque in substance. I wish I could convey to the sight of those who read this the merest reflection of that heavenly colour, that pale tint found nowhere else on earth. Mrs. Howard Vincent.
Mrs. Howard Vincent was but one of a large number of tourists who wrote down their impressions. Most were awestruck by what they saw, and these written accounts are part of the terrace's great legacy. They all speak of the extraordinary beauty and unparalleled magnificence. For Victorian tourists, they were the jewel in the crown of natural wonders that New Zealand presented to them. Fed by 2 large hot springs, the terraces had formed over many hundreds of years, as the hot water, charged with minerals, flowed downhill, depositing silica as it cooled.
They would gradually make their way up, carefully picking their way along the edge of the terraces so they didn't get their feet boiled. and across stepping stones onto a little rock on the edge of the great basin where the boiling spring feeding the terraces was, and climbing on this they would stare through the swirling vapours, hoping occasionally to get a glimpse of the great cones of water boiling up in the centre of this basin.
Next stop on the journey was the Pink Terrace, a 15-minute journey in a dugout canoe. Here the tourists finally had their chance to bathe. Visiting Victorian novelist Anthony Trollope was moved to write,
I can imagine nothing more delicious to the bather. In the bath, when you strike your chest against it, it is soft to the touch. You press yourself against it and it is smooth. You lie upon it, and though it is firm, it gives to you. You plunge against the sides, driving the water over your body, but you do not bruise yourself. I have never heard of other bathing like this in the world. Anthony Trollope.
And where in the world would you ever hear of anything like that? Nature supplying baths of various temperatures. It was the 8th wonder of the world at the time.
Little did anyone realise that the mountain Tarawera was being primed to explode.
Strange fascination about this curious truncated mountain. It looks bare and scarred, its steep walls rising up black and terrible as if blasted with lightning, the very sublimity of desolation. No wonder that the Maori imagination invests this spot with a sacred horror. It is to them a city of the dead and may not lightly be approached. And when the clouds gather round its summits and roll in heavy masses along its sides, driven by the fierce winds that play about the crest, it requires no act of imagination to people it with weird and spiritual terrors. Alexander Wilson.
Dominating all around it, Mt Tarawera had long been central to the Arawa tribes living in its shadow.
The mountain itself, Mt Tarawera,
is a burial ground. It's a burial ground. And some of our ancestors are buried up there, or they might have been blown up. But that's our mountain.
In 1886, Maori experience of the geothermal area was only about 500 years old, a blink in geological time. European observation was less than 50 years. No one knew whether the mountain was extinct or just dormant.
I don't think they had a great fear of it because people lived right under its bulk right up to the time of the eruption. They lived on the two little islands that were in Lake Rutomahana, which constantly rumbled and moved and shifted. They bathed in the terraces. They were accustomed to earthquakes. They were accustomed to variations in the thermal activity.
The summer of 1886 was dry and the unpaved country roads were dusty. In Rotorua and Tawairoa, hoteliers were rubbing their hands. The perfect weather had boosted tourist numbers and beds and boats were full. 1886 promised to be a bumper year.
There was, fortunately, a close association between non-Maori and Maori. It was the non-Maori who brought the people here, who had disseminated the word of the terraces, who controlled the transport. But once here, it was the Maori people who took over and entertained and guided and looked after the tourists. And so they were very quickly aware of the value of tourism.
Two Te Arawa tribes, Tūhorangi and Ngāti Rangitihi, competed in wooing the tourists. The more prominent